The early stories of African Americans in California are not well known.
Southerners came to California to mine the gold and brought their slaves. And when the slaves came out here, they met free blacks who taught them into escaping or claiming their freedom.
Tonight on City View, we'll tell you those stories.
Upon its first session, the State Assembly shall pass such laws as will effectively prohibit free persons of color from immigrating to and settling in this state.
People of all colors stood together to fight injustice. In fact, California had its own underground railroad, and when a slave had escaped to freedom, he was said to be in the wind. The black experience in California from the beginning through 1950. Good evening, I'm Mark Brown. Let me ask you something. Do you remember the first time you opened an old album and looked at the photos of relatives from long ago, knowing that as elders told the stories of these people, that somehow they were your stories too?
If we really want to talk about the participation of people of African descent in California, we can start as early as 1781. And a number of the settlers who originally founded what became known as the city of Los Angeles were of African or Afro-Hispanic descent.
It was founded in 1781 by 44 pobladores known as the Founding Fathers. These Founding Fathers, 26 were of African descent.
They had Hispanic names, and in those days, the church sanctioned interracial marriages so that they could build a colony. And they were close to the Los Angeles River, and this is where they got their water, and this was the city.
The spirit of the pobladores was passed to many pioneers and frontiersmen of African descent. John Grider, an expert horse trainer, came to California in 1841. A hard worker, Grider saved enough money to buy his mother out of bondage and joined the American rebels who took the town of Sonora, claiming it as an American territory. It was John Grider who supplied the paint for the first flag that was raised. In 1849, the California Gold Rush began. Stories of the riches to be found here quickly spread east, calling many white Southerners to seek their fortunes in the West. Many brought their slaves with them.
First, you had those black people who were forced to come here with their slave owners. A fair number of ex-slaves were allowed to gain their freedom or to purchase their freedom by virtue of either accumulating wealth through their labors, being rented out for one purpose or another, and or through the mines, being allowed to mine gold and then paying whatever their net value was to their owner.
Although California entered the Union as a free state, there were those who were so virulently racist that they had sought to insert a clause into the state charter that would prevent any slave or free black from entering the state of California. The clause was never approved, but in 1852, California passed a fugitive slave law, which, in essence, meant that former slave owners could come to California and force now free black people back into bondage. The small black community quickly began to mobilize to overturn this law, and their efforts bore many heroes like Mary Ellen Pleasant.
Well, Mary Ellen Pleasant saw that there was a real need for the few blacks that were in California at that time, and they were mainly concentrated in San Francisco and Sacramento, to organize, to come together, and to work as a group to fight against being taken back into slavery. She was involved in a very famous fugitive slave case called Archy Lee. Archy Lee was brought to California by a man named Stovall. And Stovall brought him to California and taught school for a year and hired Archy Lee out, collecting his earnings. Well, he stayed in California over a year, which violated the state fugitive slave law, which did not allow him to take his slave back. And he wanted to go back, I think it was to Mississippi or one of the southern states.
Well, Archie didn't like that one bit, and he flees. And he goes to hide in a boarding house owned by black people in Sacramento.
But Archie is soon captured and lands in the hands of his owner, who secretly plans to illegally steal Archie back to the South. But Stovall underestimated the power of California's Underground Railroad.
On the day he was to be commandeered, black folks were out patrolling the wharves. Barbers, the longshoremen, the domestics were on the lookout for Archy Lee.
Sure enough, as the larger ship begins to pull out of the bay, a small skiff comes around the bend. In this skiff, Stovall, an accomplice, and Archy Lee bundled up in the bottom of this boat. Black people in the community mortgaged their homes, held bake sales, and made selfless donations to pay whatever was necessary to take Archy Lee's case to court. After 4 trials, Archy Lee finally gained his freedom. But why is this case so important?
In a nutshell, I think it demonstrates the will, the determination, and the cohesiveness of a fairly small Northern California black community.
But this small community was concerned with more than slavery. In 1851, California passed an anti-testimony law which said that no black person could testify against any white person for any reason. People of all colors signed petitions to repeal this law, but the legislature ignored the public outcry.
They could be robbed, they could be murdered, anything could happen to them, and they could not testify in their own behalf. And so Mary Ellen Pleasant, along with several black store owners and some of her abolitionist friends from the North, came together and organized what was called the Colored Convention of California.
The Colored Convention provided a forum for black civic and business leaders to exchange ideas on how to improve conditions for the race. It was the first time black people from all over the state had gathered in pursuit of a single goal.
We're all very industrious individuals, but also individuals, as I mentioned before, who were very experienced fighters for justice. Many of them were confidants of Frederick Douglass. They kept in correspondence with him and had a number of connections in the East, and in fact had fought the good fight for many years on the East Coast before they ever came west. So they weren't new. This wasn't new to them.
Unfortunately, the colored conventions had no direct impact on the state assembly, and there was no change in the anti-testimony law until a national bill took precedent 11 years later in 1862. In 1863, the Proclamation was signed and the Civil War followed. The Southern California land boom was on, and now free blacks were lured west. We'll discover what they found here when Stevie returns.